Hello, midnight wanderers, and welcome to Dreadvane. This is where ancient whispers rise beneath a crimson sky, carrying you softly into the world of dreams and shadows. Before tonight's haunting story begins, tell me, what corner of the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. And if the silence of the night calls to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll never miss the moon's next dark secret. One of my closest friends lives in a house that every single person around him eventually admits is haunted. Not jokingly haunted. Not old houses creak sometimes haunted. I mean the kind of house where people who normally laugh at ghost stories suddenly stop making jokes after spending enough time there. Even my friend admits it openly now. His family talks about it casually, the same way people discuss bad plumbing or noisy neighbors. At some point, they all just accepted that strange things happen there regularly. The weirdest part is how normal everyone acts about it. Like they've gotten used to living with something they can't explain. There's one figure in particular almost everyone connected to that house has either seen or heard at some point. An old man. Not a detailed full-body apparition standing dramatically in hallways or anything like that. Usually it's glimpses. A figure pacing through rooms. Footsteps upstairs when nobody else is home. Movement caught from the corner of your eye. Even my friend's little kid talked about the old man before anyone ever mentioned ghosts around him. And honestly, children casually acknowledging something invisible always makes situations feel worse somehow. I've spent enough time in that house over the years that eventually I experienced things too. The house itself wasn't creepy at first glance. It was a split-level suburban home with a decent-sized backyard and a finished lower den area, completely ordinary from the outside. If you drove past it, you'd never suspect anything strange about the place. But inside, the atmosphere felt off. Not constantly. That's important. Most of the time, everything seemed perfectly normal. Then suddenly, without warning, the mood of the house would shift. The air felt heavier somehow. Certain rooms became uncomfortable to stand in for no obvious reason. And there was always movement. Little things mostly. Footsteps when everyone was sitting still. The sound of someone crossing the kitchen upstairs while the room sat empty. Doors that seemed to move slightly after you looked away. At first, I tried rationalizing everything. Old houses settle. Pipes make noise. Peripheral vision plays tricks on people. I'm naturally skeptical by default. So I spent a long time trying to explain every strange thing logically. Eventually, I ran out of explanations. One night in particular completely changed the way I looked at that house. My friend had decided to throw a party. Nothing huge, just a bunch of us hanging out, drinking beer, grilling food, and sitting around telling stories late into the night. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward the house itself because, honestly, if you spent enough time there, ghost stories became unavoidable. Someone would always bring something up eventually. One person heard footsteps upstairs while home alone. Another saw movement in the hallway. Someone else swore they heard an old man coughing in the den one night. By that point, most of us had experienced enough weirdness there that nobody completely dismissed the stories anymore. One of our friends, Mike, wasn't having any of it, though. Mike was the type of guy who prided himself on being aggressively rational. Engineer mindset. Scientific explanations for everything. He didn't mock anyone directly, but you could tell he believed all of us were feeding off each other's imaginations. At one point during the conversation, he laughed and said, "I'm a science guy. I don't believe any of this unless somebody shows me actual evidence." Honestly, I respected that response, because I felt similarly. I'm skeptical by nature too. I don't jump straight to supernatural explanations for things. If there's a logical answer available, I'll take it every time. So I remember telling him exactly that. I explained several strange experiences I'd had there over the years, then admitted openly, my best explanation is ghosts. But if you've got a better explanation, I'm listening. Mike just shrugged. Fair enough. The conversation moved on after that. At this point, most people were outside in the backyard drinking and talking around the grill. The kitchen upstairs remained crowded too, with people doing shots and yelling over music. The setup of the house matters here. From the backyard patio, you could see directly into the downstairs den through a large sliding glass door. The hanging blinds covering the door were partially open, and inside the den, a lamp remained on near the couch. So even from outside, you had a clear view into the room, or at least mostly clear. I was standing beside Mike during a lull in conversation when I happened to glance toward the den. Immediately, something looked wrong. There was a shadow moving across the blinds. At first, that doesn't sound strange. Shadows happen constantly around parties. People moving indoors, light shifting, reflections from outside. Except this shadow didn't make sense. The shape looked distinctly human. Tall, broad shoulders, probably male. And we could clearly see there was nobody standing inside the room creating it. That's what froze me. The blinds were open enough that we could see directly into the den. The lamp creating the shadow sat visible beside the chair. And between the lamp and the blinds? Empty space. No person. Nothing. Yet somehow, a human shadow moved slowly across the blinds anyway. I remember staring at it for several seconds, trying desperately to rationalize what I was seeing. Then I noticed something even worse. The shadow began halfway up the blinds. There were no legs extending downward naturally from an unseen body. Instead, the shape seemed to emerge directly from the floor itself, forming from two dark points resembling feet before continuing upward into the outline of a person. It moved calmly across the blinds. Not quickly, not flickering, walking. I slowly turned toward Mike and pointed silently. He followed my hand and stared directly at the shadow. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then finally, he said something I still remember perfectly. I can't explain that. That was it. No dramatic screaming, no panic, just quiet confusion from someone who, moments earlier, demanded evidence. Honestly, the strangest part is what happened afterward. We simply went back to drinking. That's genuinely how weird experiences work sometimes. People imagine paranormal moments as dramatic turning points where everyone loses their minds. Reality is stranger. Sometimes something deeply unsettling happens. Everyone acknowledges it silently. And then life just continues. Nobody wanted to investigate the den. Nobody wanted to discuss it too deeply either. So we kept drinking and talking while pretending the impossible shadow hadn't just crossed an empty room. Eventually, like everyone else, I got drunk enough to stop caring. The next thing I remember is waking up sometime early the following morning. Apparently, I'd passed out in a chair inside the den, beside the exact same lamp that cast the shadow the night before. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, while the house sat mostly quiet after the party. My friend stood nearby changing his son's diaper while half awake himself. And that's when I saw him, the old man. Not clearly, never clearly, just movement at the edge of my vision. I looked toward the kitchen entrance and caught sight of an elderly figure slowly pacing back and forth across the upstairs kitchen floor. Same thing people always described. Calm pacing, hands behind his back, like someone thinking quietly while walking around their own home. The moment I turned my head fully, the figure vanished, didn't even react strongly anymore. That's the weird thing about that house. After enough experiences, fear slowly gave way to exhausted acceptance. You stopped asking if something strange happened, and instead started wondering when the next thing would happen. I never saw the old man directly face to face. Always peripheral glimpses, always movement. But enough people described the exact same figure independently that it became difficult to ignore. Especially the kid. Children saying strange things can sometimes be coincidence. But my friend's son used to casually mention the old man walking around upstairs long before anyone discussed ghosts near him. And kids don't usually invent the same details adults already quietly noticed. To this day, I still don't know what I believe. Maybe there's some environmental explanation for the feelings people experience in certain places. Maybe human brains are better at influencing each other than we realize. Maybe old houses simply collect stories until every noise starts feeling haunted. Or maybe some places genuinely hold on to something after people die. I honestly don't know. But I do know this. I've never found a logical explanation for a human shadow crossing blinds in front of an empty room. And apparently, neither could Mike. Back when I was a teenager, I made a lot of incredibly stupid decisions. At the time, though, none of them felt especially dangerous, because that's how being 17 works. You think you're invincible right up until reality grabs you by the throat and shows you otherwise. This story happened during one of those dumb teenage phases where experimenting with drugs felt exciting instead of terrifying. A friend of mine and I had decided one Friday after school to take psychedelic mushrooms together. Neither of us were inexperienced with them. We'd both tripped before several times, and because nothing bad had happened previously, we'd gotten comfortable. Way too comfortable. Looking back now, that confidence feels embarrassing. We each took an eighth sometime during the afternoon and planned to spend the evening hanging out at his house, listening to music, and doing typical teenage stoner nonsense. At first, everything felt normal. Actually, better than normal. That's part of why psychedelics trick people so easily. The beginning often feels euphoric. Colors become brighter. Thoughts feel deeper. Music sounds incredible. You convince yourself you've discovered some hidden layer of reality. For the first couple hours, we were laughing constantly and talking about ridiculous philosophical ideas like every other pair of high teenagers convinced they've suddenly become enlightened. Then slowly things started turning bad for me. It didn't happen all at once. The mood just shifted. The room suddenly felt too small. My thoughts became disorganized and strangely aggressive. My body felt heavy and disconnected from itself. Then nausea hit hard. Real hard. I remember sweating heavily and feeling increasingly dizzy while trying to pretend everything was fine, because admitting you're having a bad trip somehow makes it feel more real. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I told my friend I needed to go home immediately. My house was only a short drive away down the street, which at the time felt manageable, even though obviously neither of us should have been anywhere near a vehicle. That's the thing about being young and intoxicated. You constantly underestimate danger because your brain convinces you everything will somehow work out. I barely made it outside before collapsing. One second I was walking toward my car, and the next I woke up flat on my back in the middle of the street with my friend kneeling over me, asking if I was okay. Apparently I'd blacked out completely for several seconds. Even now, I still don't know exactly why. Maybe dehydration, maybe panic, maybe the mushrooms reacting badly with my body. At the time, though, I just wanted the entire experience to end. I remember feeling unbelievably detached from reality while climbing weakly into the passenger seat of my own car. Before we started driving, I asked my friend multiple times if he felt capable of driving. 3 separate times. Each time he assured me he was completely fine. And honestly, he seemed okay. More stable than I felt anyway. His neighborhood was built around a small circular cove, and because we'd parked on the wrong side of the street, he started driving toward the end of the cove to turn around before heading toward my house. That's when everything became horrifying. People who've never experienced psychedelics don't really understand how strange your thoughts become during bad trips. Your brain moves unbelievably fast, but not logically. Random impulses and intrusive ideas suddenly feel emotionally overwhelming. As we started driving, I remember slumped half-conscious in the passenger seat, staring out the windshield while one deeply disturbing thought repeated inside my head over and over. What if we just drove straight into something? Not because I genuinely wanted to die. I wasn't suicidal. The thought felt more abstract than that, almost like my brain believed crashing would somehow interrupt the nightmare happening inside my head, like destruction itself would reset reality. That's the terrifying thing about altered states. Thoughts that would normally horrify you suddenly appear detached from morality or consequence. And then, almost immediately after that thought crossed my mind, my friend had a seizure. A full seizure. At the wheel. 1 second he was driving normally. The next, his body locked violently and his foot slammed down hard onto the accelerator. The car launched forward. I remember the sudden screaming sound of the engine and the terrifying acceleration as we shot down the residential street directly toward the house, sitting at the end of the cove. That moment remains the single most frightening experience of my life. People always say your life flashes before your eyes during near-death experiences. That isn't exactly true. For me, time simply slowed down. Every second stretched unnaturally long while my brain processed thousands of thoughts at once. I remember seeing the house growing larger through the windshield. I remember realizing with absolute certainty that we were about to die. I remember wondering how my parents would react when they got the phone call. I remember noticing stupid details, like how bright the porch light looked and how quiet the neighborhood seemed. And most vividly, I remember feeling overwhelming regret. Not dramatic regret. Just this horrible, crushing realization that I was 17 years old and about to die because of something unbelievably stupid. Neither of us wore seatbelts. At that age, we rarely did. Another terrible decision layered on top of many others. The car jumped the curb at full speed. Then came the impact. The sound was indescribable. Glass exploding, metal folding inward, wood splintering apart. The entire front of the car smashed directly through the front window of the house. We literally drove into someone's living room. Everything afterward became chaotic fragments. Dust filling the air. Alarms screaming somewhere nearby. The smell of gasoline and broken drywall. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I was dead, because my hearing disappeared almost completely, except for this distant ringing sound. Then pain arrived. Not overwhelming pain. Just enough sharpness to remind me I was still alive. Miraculously, unbelievably, both of us survived with only relatively minor injuries. Cuts, bruises, scratches, that's it. To this day, I still don't fully understand how. We should have died. Honestly, we should have killed someone else too. If anybody had been sitting in the room we crashed through, they probably wouldn't have survived. That realization haunted me afterward, much more than concern for myself. The entire incident felt so surreal that even now parts of it seem dreamlike. And then there's the detail everybody always reacts to when I tell this story. It happened on Friday the 13th, November 2009. I know that sounds like something invented for dramatic effect, but it's true. At the time, though, that detail barely mattered compared to the trauma of almost dying. After the accident, my friend and I stopped touching psychedelics entirely. The experience scared both of us badly enough that neither of us wanted anything to do with them anymore. For months afterward, though, certain things triggered flashbacks immediately. Loud alarms, especially. Because during the crash, some kind of security alarm inside the house had gone off instantly after impact. A piercing, repetitive electronic tone that echoed through the destroyed room while we sat there bleeding and disoriented. That sound burned itself permanently into my memory. About a year later, my friend and I were standing outside his house talking one evening when he suddenly stopped mid-conversation. His expression changed immediately. Then he asked quietly, "Do you hear that?" At first, I didn't understand what he meant. Then I heard it too. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The exact same alarm sound from the crash, same pitch, same rhythm. Somewhere nearby in the neighborhood. The second I recognized it, every hair on my body stood up. Because instantly, without warning, my brain dragged me right back into that car. Back to the shattered glass, back to the impact, back to staring death directly in the face at 17 years old. Neither of us said anything for several seconds. We just stood there listening while the sound echoed faintly through the evening air. And honestly, that moment scared me almost more than the accident itself. Not because it was supernatural, but because trauma works that way. Sometimes your brain stores certain sounds, smells, or images so deeply that years later they can still pull you violently backward into the worst moment of your life in a single second. To this day, whenever I hear alarms resembling that sound, I immediately feel cold all over. And every single time, I remember exactly what it felt like watching a house rush toward us while realizing there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. When I was 14, my friends and I basically lived on our bikes during the summer. Every afternoon, we'd ride around the neighborhood for hours with absolutely no plan. We'd hit convenience stores for snacks, race each other through empty parking lots, and explore random places simply because nobody told us not to. At that age, boredom automatically turns ordinary locations into adventures. One of our regular spots was the local middle school near my neighborhood. Behind the school sat a stretch of woods that every kid in the area knew about. During daytime, it looked harmless enough. Just a patch of trees separating the school from a set of soccer fields farther back. But there was something strange about those woods. A narrow dirt trail cut through them, and halfway along the trail sat this tiny wooden bridge, crossing over a shallow ditch before continuing toward the soccer fields. Kids used the path all the time during the day, but almost nobody stayed in there long once evening started approaching. Because the woods had a reputation. Every neighborhood has places like that growing up. Locations surrounded by rumors passed between kids until nobody remembers where the stories even started. According to the rumor, some homeless guy lived somewhere deep inside those woods. Not just an ordinary homeless person either. A crazy homeless guy. The kind of rumor adults would probably dismiss instantly, but which terrified middle school kids completely. What made the stories worse was that almost everyone who entered those woods eventually experienced something weird. Usually nothing dramatic. Just unsettling. People hearing movement in the bushes, catching glimpses of someone deeper in the trees, finding strange piles of trash or signs that somebody had been living out there. and because multiple people described similar things independently, the rumors kept growing. That afternoon, about 5 of us were hanging around near the edge of the woods talking about those exact stories. We'd stopped our bikes beside the trail entrance while joking around and trying to scare each other. The weather was warm, and sunlight filtered through the trees in long streaks across the dirt path. Everything looked completely normal. But once the conversation shifted toward the homeless man rumors, everybody started sharing personal experiences. One friend claimed he'd heard someone walking parallel to him through the trees one evening while riding his bike alone. Another swore he'd found what looked like a makeshift campsite farther inside the woods, complete with garbage bags arranged like sleeping bags beneath branches. I had my own story too. A few weeks earlier, I'd gone into those woods with another friend during the afternoon. At one point, while standing near dense brush beside the trail, I became convinced I saw movement deeper inside. Not an animal, a person. I remember squinting hard trying to see through the branches while this uneasy feeling crawled through my stomach. But after several seconds of staring, nothing moved again. Eventually, my friend and I laughed it off and left. Still, the feeling stayed with me afterward. So there we were that day, all standing around recounting creepy stories about the woods while pretending none of us were actually nervous. I happened to be facing directly toward the trees while everyone else faced toward me and the school parking lot behind me. That positioning probably saved my friends from freezing when everything happened, because I was the first person to see him. Right in the middle of one of the stories, I heard bushes rustling somewhere behind my friends. At first, I assumed it was an animal. Then suddenly a man exploded out of the trees, not walking, charging, straight at us. The image of him bursting through the brush is still burned into my brain years later. Dirty clothes, wild movement, arms pumping as he sprinted directly toward our group with terrifying speed. Everything happened instantly after that. I screamed as loud as I possibly could and pointed behind my friends toward the woods. I don't even remember consciously deciding to yell. Pure instinct just took over. The second they saw my face and heard me screaming, every single one of them turned and bolted immediately. Because they'd all been facing away from the woods, they didn't freeze trying to process what they were seeing. They just ran. Or biked, technically. Everyone scattered in different directions almost instantly. Except me. Because while they escaped immediately, I was stuck facing the man directly. And suddenly my body completely locked up. People always imagine fear as some dramatic adrenaline-fueled reaction where you instantly know what to do. Real fear often does the opposite. For a second or two, I genuinely couldn't move. Everything slowed down horribly. I remember hearing my friends yelling somewhere behind me while the man kept sprinting closer through the grass. My bike suddenly felt gigantic beneath me. At 14, I was still small for my age, and the bike frame already felt slightly too large under normal circumstances. But in that moment, it felt impossible to control. I tried turning it around quickly to escape. The front wheel twisted awkwardly. My hand slipped on the handlebars. Panic hit harder. The man kept getting closer. I remember seeing his expression clearly for one horrible second. Not necessarily angry exactly, but intense in a way that terrified me immediately. I scrambled to get my feet onto the pedals. My foot slipped off completely. That moment felt endless. I genuinely thought I was about to get grabbed. The man was so close by then, I could hear his footsteps pounding against the ground behind me. Somehow, I managed to regain my balance and jam my foot back onto the pedal just in time. Then, I took off as hard as I possibly could. I remember hearing the man right behind me for another second or two before the distance finally started increasing. At one point, I felt movement close enough behind me that I'm almost certain he tried grabbing me and missed. I never looked back to confirm it. Honestly, I was too terrified to turn around even slightly. I just pedaled harder than I ever had in my life. Adrenaline completely took over. The school, the woods, the trail, everything blurred together while I focused entirely on escaping. Eventually, I caught up with two of my friends farther down the road, all of us completely panicked and out of breath. Nobody laughed afterward. Nobody tried acting brave. We were genuinely shaken. And the weirdest part? None of us actually knew who the man was. Maybe he really was homeless. Maybe he was mentally ill. Maybe we accidentally wandered too close to wherever he was staying and scared him too. But at 14 years old, none of those possibilities mattered. All we knew was this. We had spent the afternoon telling stories about a strange man living in the woods. Then moments later, a man literally burst out of those woods and chased us. That was enough. Even now, years later, I still feel uncomfortable whenever I pass wooded trails alone, especially narrow ones. Because once you experience somebody suddenly charging out of the trees toward you at full speed, your brain never fully forgets how vulnerable that moment felt. And honestly, I never went back into those woods after that day. A few years ago, something happened that still sits in the back of my mind because I genuinely can't explain it logically. I've tried. Trust me, I'd actually prefer a normal explanation. And honestly, if it had only happened to me, I probably would have eventually convinced myself I imagined the whole thing. But the fact that my girlfriend experienced most of it herself and still remembers every detail clearly years later makes it much harder to dismiss. It started late one night when we were driving back to my parents' house. At the time, I still lived there, and my girlfriend was staying over for the night. We were tired, mostly quiet during the drive home, just trying to get back and sleep. But as we got closer to my neighborhood, we immediately noticed something was wrong. The road ahead was filled with flashing lights. Police cars, fire trucks, yellow police tape stretched across part of the street just past the turn leading toward my house. Even from a distance, you could tell something serious had happened. Traffic was being redirected, emergency workers moved around everywhere, and the entire area had that strange, tense atmosphere accident scenes always carry late at night. At the time, though, we had no idea what actually happened. We assumed maybe it was a bad car crash somewhere nearby, but nobody stopped us from reaching the house since the road closure started farther down. So eventually, we got inside and tried not to think too much about it. Now, because I still lived with my parents, my girlfriend and I weren't allowed to sleep in the same room. My room was upstairs while I usually slept downstairs on the couch whenever she stayed over. So after hanging out for a little while, we split up for the night. She went upstairs to sleep in my room. I stayed downstairs on the couch. At first, everything seemed normal. The house was quiet, except for the occasional distant sound of emergency vehicles somewhere outside. I was half asleep already when suddenly I heard my girlfriend scream my name from upstairs. Not scared screaming at first. Angry screaming, like she thought I was messing with her somehow. Then immediately afterward, I heard a loud thump from upstairs. I sat upright instantly. A second later, she came storming halfway down the stairs, looking genuinely furious and confused at the same time. Before I could even ask what happened, she started accusing me of sneaking upstairs and grabbing her ankle. At first, I honestly laughed because the idea sounded ridiculous. But then I realized she was completely serious, and also genuinely shaken. Once she calmed down enough to explain properly, this is what she told me happened. She had been lying in bed trying to fall asleep when suddenly something grabbed her ankle hard and yanked her downward toward the foot of the bed. Not brushed against her, not lightly touched. Grabbed. Hard enough that her entire body shifted. Her immediate assumption was that I had somehow come upstairs quietly and was trying to scare her from beneath the bed or beside it. So she turned around ready to yell at me. But nobody was there. The room was empty. That's when she started getting angry and confused because she couldn't understand what had physically pulled her. Then, while getting out of bed to come downstairs and confront me, she started hearing movement inside the room itself. Heavy movement. Thumping sounds. At that exact moment was when I heard her yell my name, followed by the loud noise upstairs. Naturally, I followed her back upstairs immediately, because by then she was genuinely frightened. And honestly, hearing fear in someone's voice changes situations instantly. The second we reached the hallway outside my bedroom, we both stopped, because we could still hear noises coming from inside the room. Not constant chaos. Intermittent thumping. Movement. Like somebody shifting around furniture angrily. The problem was obvious immediately. Nobody else was upstairs. My parents were asleep, and my room door remained partly closed, exactly how we'd left it earlier. I remember both of us just standing there, listening for several seconds without speaking. Even now, I can still clearly remember the atmosphere of that moment. The entire upstairs hallway felt tense and wrong somehow. My girlfriend absolutely refused to go back inside immediately. Honestly, I wasn't exactly eager either. So we stayed downstairs for probably 20 minutes while the occasional noises continued overhead. Every time the sound stopped, we'd convince ourselves maybe we imagined it. Then another heavy thump would echo from upstairs again. Finally, we worked up the nerve to check the room together. When we opened the door, the entire room looked wrong immediately. Not destroyed, but disturbed. The bed itself had shifted crookedly off the box spring, like something heavy had been pushing or jerking against it. Blankets were tangled everywhere. A few objects near the bedside had fallen over onto the floor. It looked less like a burglary and more like somebody had thrown some kind of violent tantrum inside the room. My girlfriend refused to stay upstairs after that. Honestly, I don't blame her. She spent the rest of the night downstairs on the couch beside me while neither of us slept much at all. And here's the part that still unsettles me years later. The next morning, we finally learned what had happened on the road the night before. According to neighbors, an older man, somewhere in his 50s or 60s, had been delivering pizzas during the stormy weather that evening. Apparently, while driving through the curve near our street, he lost control of his vehicle, went over the embankment, and died in the crash. The accident happened around the same time we arrived home. And importantly, neither my girlfriend nor I knew any of that the previous night. At all. Nobody had told us. We only knew there were police and emergency vehicles nearby. That's it. Now logically, I understand correlation doesn't automatically mean anything supernatural happened. Maybe my girlfriend experienced some kind of half-asleep panic reaction. Maybe the noises upstairs came from the house settling. Maybe we unintentionally scared each other into interpreting ordinary things as paranormal because we'd already seen the emergency scene outside beforehand. All of those explanations are possible. But there's one thing I still struggle to explain. My girlfriend was absolutely convinced something physically grabbed her ankle. Not emotionally convinced, physically convinced. And she's never changed her story once over the years. Not exaggerated it, not dramatized it, Every detail stayed exactly the same every time she told it, especially one part. She always insisted whatever was in that room felt angry, aggressive, not sad, not confused, angry. That detail always bothered me more than anything else. Because if the entire situation really was just fear and coincidence, why did both of us come away with the exact same emotional impression from that room that night? To this day, I still don't know what I believe about ghosts or paranormal stuff. Most stories online honestly sound fake or exaggerated to me. But this experience? This one stays with me. Because even now, years later, when I replay that night in my head, there's still a part of me that wonders whether something followed us home from that accident scene outside. And if it did, I honestly don't know whether it was trying to get our attention or trying to get inside. I still remember the exact feeling I had that night, and honestly, even now as an adult, it still creeps me out when I think about it too long. It happened when I was around 14 years old, back when horror movies felt way too real, and every strange sound in the house could convince me something supernatural was waiting in the dark. Around that time, one of my friends had to give away their dog, a beagle named Daisy. My parents agreed to take her in because I had been begging for a dog for years. I was obsessed with her from the moment she arrived. She had these huge brown eyes and floppy ears, and she followed me everywhere like we had known each other forever. Since she was still adjusting to the house, my parents let her sleep in my room at night so she wouldn't feel nervous or alone. At first, everything was normal. Actually, it was better than normal. I loved having her there. My room was on the top floor of our house, and it always felt isolated from everyone else. My parents' bedroom was downstairs, and when everyone went to sleep, the entire upstairs became completely silent. Before we got Daisy, I used to hate that silence because every little creak sounded suspicious. But having her in the room somehow made me feel safe. If a dog could sleep peacefully, then nothing bad could possibly be happening, right? That confidence lasted about a week. One night I had fallen asleep while watching TV. I remember waking up suddenly, but not the normal kind of waking up where you slowly open your eyes and stretch. I mean the kind where your body instantly knows something is wrong before your brain catches up. The room was dark except for the blue glow from my digital clock. At first I couldn't figure out what had woken me. Then I heard it. A low growl, not loud, not aggressive, just deep and steady. I froze under my blanket and looked toward the foot of my bed where Daisy had been sleeping earlier. She wasn't lying down anymore. She was sitting perfectly still near my bedroom door, staring directly at it. Her ears were stiff, and the fur along her back was raised. I reached over and turned on my reading light beside the bed. The second the light came on, I expected her to relax, maybe wag her tail or look embarrassed like dogs sometimes do when they bark at nothing. But she didn't move. She just kept staring at the door. At 14 years old, your imagination is already dangerous enough, but mine was even worse because I had recently watched Paranormal Activity with a couple of friends. That movie messed me up for weeks. Every shadow looked suspicious afterward. Every noise felt intentional. So now, I'm sitting there at maybe 2 a.m. with a growling dog staring at my bedroom door like something was standing on the other side of it. I tried convincing myself she probably needed to go outside. That had to be it. Maybe she heard a raccoon outside or needed to pee. Anything normal sounded better than the thoughts running through my head. I got out of bed and slowly walked to the door. Daisy didn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed locked forward the entire time. The moment I opened the bedroom door, she exploded forward. I had never seen a dog move that fast. She bolted out of my room, claws scraping across the hardwood floor, and flew down the stairs like she was chasing someone. Not playing, chasing. I just stood there staring into the dark hallway, completely stunned. Then I heard her downstairs, running, fast, back and forth through the house. The sound echoed through the first floor like someone was sprinting from room to room. I remember gripping my bedroom doorknob so tightly my hand hurt. Every horror movie scene I had ever watched suddenly replayed in my head. I didn't want to go downstairs, not even a little. But after a few minutes, curiosity mixed with fear in the worst possible way. I needed to know what she was doing. So I started turning on lights one by one as I made my way downstairs. Every step creaked loudly beneath me. The entire house felt different somehow. Colder, too quiet between the sounds of Daisy running around below. When I finally reached the kitchen, I flipped on the light and immediately saw her standing near the entrance to our family room, growling. Her body looked stiff as stone. The hair on her back stood straight up, while she stared into the darkness of the family room like she could see someone standing there. I swear my heart almost stopped. For a second, I genuinely believed I was about to see a person staring back at me from the dark. I rushed over and hit the family room light switch. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The room was completely empty. The TV was off. Curtains still. No movement anywhere. And within seconds, Daisy stopped growling. Just like that. She blinked a couple times, looked around the room, then casually walked away like nothing had happened. I stood there trying to catch my breath while my skin still crawled with goosebumps. I ended up letting her outside into the backyard because I figured maybe she really did need to go out. But honestly, if I'm being real, I think I just wanted an excuse not to stand alone inside the house anymore. Somehow, being outside with the dog felt safer than staying indoors by myself. I remember the cold air hitting my face while Daisy sniffed around the yard like everything was perfectly normal. Meanwhile, I kept looking back toward the windows of the house, expecting to see someone staring out at me. Nothing happened for the rest of the night, but I barely slept afterward. For the next few days, I kept replaying the whole thing in my head. During the daytime, it sounded ridiculous. Dogs bark at random things all the time. Maybe she heard mice in the walls. Maybe she smelled another animal outside. Maybe I overreacted because I was tired and paranoid from horror movies. That explanation worked during daylight. At night, though, it felt different. Our house had certain sounds you got used to over the years. One specific thing I always noticed was the floor outside my bedroom. Whenever someone walked near my door, the floorboards made this very distinct creaking sound. It happened every single time without fail. I knew exactly how it sounded because my parents used to wake me up for school every morning, and I'd hear that creak before they even knocked. A few nights after the first incident, I woke up suddenly again. This time, I heard the floorboard creak first. That exact sound, right outside my room. At first, I figured it was one of my parents. My mom had restless legs and insomnia, so it wasn't unusual for her to wander around late at night. More than once, she had caught me staying awake playing video games at ridiculous hours. But something about this felt wrong immediately. Maybe it was because the house was too quiet afterward. No footsteps, no knocking, just silence. Then, Daisy started growling again. The second I heard it, every hair on my arm stood up. She was sitting near the bedroom door again, staring at the same spot as before. Only this time, instead of hiding under my blanket like a terrified kid, adrenaline kicked in. Maybe I was angry at myself for being scared the first time. Maybe I was tired of lying there imagining things. Whatever the reason, I suddenly jumped out of bed and rushed toward the door before I could talk myself out of it. I flipped on my bedroom light, grabbed the doorknob, and yanked the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty. No parents, no shadows, no movement at all. But Daisy reacted instantly. She sprinted out of the room again like she was chasing someone running down the stairs. That was the part that truly scared me. If she had simply barked at random noises, I could explain it away. Dogs do weird things sometimes. But the way she moved felt intentional. Focused. Like she was following something I couldn't see. I heard her tearing through the downstairs again while I stood frozen in the hallway. This time I couldn't force myself to follow her. My courage disappeared almost immediately after opening the door. I shut myself back inside my room and sat on my bed listening. The sounds downstairs continued for another minute or two before finally stopping. Then, silence. I remember staring at my bedroom doorway, waiting for Daisy to come back upstairs. Those few minutes felt endless. Every little noise made my chest tighten. Eventually, I heard her claws tapping against the stairs as she slowly returned upstairs. When she walked back into my room, she looked completely calm again. Tail relaxed. No growling. No tension. She jumped onto the floor beside my bed and laid down like nothing unusual had happened. Meanwhile, I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. After that, I started noticing every tiny sound in the house. My imagination went completely out of control. If the air conditioner turned on suddenly, I'd jump. If a cabinet creaked downstairs, I'd stop breathing for a second. And Daisy didn't help. Sometimes she'd randomly stare into dark rooms for too long. Other times, she'd perk her ears up toward empty hallways. Maybe normal dogs do that all the time and people simply don't notice, but after those nights, every little thing she did felt unsettling. I never told many people about it because I knew how crazy it sounded. Eventually, my parents decided to give Daisy away because she kept peeing in the house and tearing things up. I was upset at the time because despite everything, I loved that dog. She made the house feel alive. But after she left, those strange incidents stopped happening. No more random growling. No more waking up to footsteps outside my room. No more hearing her race through the house in the middle of the night. Even now, years later, I still don't know what to think about it. Part of me believes there was probably a logical explanation for everything. Dogs have incredible hearing and smell. She could have been reacting to animals outside, pipes moving inside the walls, or sounds I simply couldn't hear. Houses make strange noises at night too, especially older ones, but another part of me still remembers the feeling I had during those moments. That feeling that something was there. Not necessarily a ghost or demon or anything dramatic like that. Just something unseen moving through the house while the dog tracked it from room to room. What unsettles me most is how focused Daisy always seemed. She never acted confused. She acted like she knew exactly what she was looking at. I still think about the sound of her claws hitting the floor as she ran downstairs chasing whatever caught her attention. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night and hear a strange noise in my current house, my mind instantly goes back to those moments. And honestly, if I ever hear a dog growling at an empty hallway again, I'm probably not going to investigate it. Some things feel safer left unexplained. Around 3 or 4 years ago, right around New Year's, my family decided they wanted to take a short trip to our state capital and spend the first few days of January there. The plan was to leave on January 1st and come back on the 4th. Normally I would have gone with them, but that year I was a teenager, and like most teenagers, spending time with friends sounded way more exciting than a family trip. My friends and I had already planned a huge New Year's Eve party weeks in advance. We were all finally on vacation from school, Everyone was in a good mood, and nobody wanted the night to end early. So after a lot of convincing, my parents agreed to let me stay behind in the city while they traveled. I remember feeling incredibly grown up about the whole thing. Having the apartment to myself for a few days sounded amazing. No parents checking when I got home. No rules about staying up too late. No one telling me to clean my room. Just freedom. The party itself was exactly what you'd expect from a group of teenagers celebrating New Year's Eve. Loud music, too much soda and junk food, terrible dancing, random conversations that somehow felt extremely important at the time, and everyone trying to stay awake until sunrise. At some point during the night, we all agreed it was easier for me to sleep at my friend Lucas's house instead of going back home alone so late. His house was closer, and honestly, none of us were ready for the night to end anyway. By the time we finally fell asleep, the sun was already starting to rise. The next day, January 1st, we woke up ridiculously late. I think it was sometime in the afternoon. Everyone looked exhausted, and the entire house smelled like leftover pizza and energy drinks. We spent the first hour just sitting around talking about random things from the night before and laughing at videos we barely remembered recording, even though the party was technically over. Nobody really wanted to go home yet. So we stayed together most of the day, hanging out and continuing conversations that made absolutely no sense. At one point, Lucas's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and handed the phone toward me. "It's probably your parents," he said. That made sense because my phone had been stolen about a week earlier. Someone grabbed it while I was out downtown with friends, and I hadn't gotten a replacement yet. Since my parents had no way to contact me directly, they had Lucas's number instead. I answered, and sure enough, it was my mom. She just wanted to check in and make sure I was alive. Parents always do that, especially when they're in another city and their teenage son is home alone for the first time. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. "Did you sleep?" "A little." "Did you eat?" "Yes." "Don't stay out too late tonight." "Okay." Typical parent conversation. I handed the phone back to Lucas, and we went back to doing absolutely nothing productive. About an hour later, his phone rang again. This time I looked over automatically, expecting it to be my parents once more. Lucas answered casually while scrolling through something on his laptop. "Hello?" A pause. "Hello?" Another pause. Then he frowned slightly and looked at the screen before hanging up. "That was weird," he said. "What happened?" Nobody answered. He kept staring at the screen for another second before looking back at me. "You said your entire family traveled, right?" "Yeah." "Well," he said slowly, "that call came from your house?" For a second I thought he was joking. I grabbed the phone from him and checked the call log myself. It really was my home phone number. I stared at it longer than I probably should have. Back then, our apartment still had an old landline phone. Nobody really used it much, except my parents. And there was absolutely no reason anyone should have been calling from it, because the apartment was supposed to be empty. My first thought was that maybe one of my parents had forgotten something and asked a neighbor to check the apartment. But if that were true, why didn't the person say anything? Then I tried convincing myself it was probably just some weird phone glitch. Still, the call stayed in the back of my mind for the rest of the evening. I didn't mention it much after that, because I didn't want my friends turning it into some dramatic ghost story. But every once in a while, I'd think about it again and feel uncomfortable for no real reason. As the night went on, the group slowly started breaking apart. People went home one by one, until eventually it was just me and 2 friends left sitting around half awake watching random TV shows. Around 1 a.m., they finally offered to drive me home. That was when the nervousness really started. During the car ride, I kept replaying the phone call in my head. The later it got, the more unsettling it seemed. By the time we reached my apartment building, my imagination had completely turned against me. I still remember standing inside the elevator alone after my friends left. The elevator was painfully slow, and every second felt longer than normal. The fluorescent light above me buzzed softly while I stared at the numbers counting upward. And in my head, I kept repeating the same sentence over and over again. Please let it be a thief. Please let it be a thief. Please don't let it be something worse. It sounds ridiculous now, but fear does strange things to your brain. Somehow the idea of an actual criminal hiding inside the apartment felt less terrifying than the possibility of something supernatural. By the time the elevator doors opened, my heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. The hallway outside our apartment was completely silent. I unlocked the front door slowly and stood there for a second listening. Nothing. No voices. No movement. No TV sounds. Just silence. I reached inside and turned on the lights as quickly as possible. The apartment looked exactly the way we had left it. At first, I felt relieved. Then the silence started feeling strange again. Anyone who has ever stayed alone in a normally busy house knows the feeling. During the day, it feels peaceful. At night, it feels wrong. Every room suddenly seems larger. Every shadow looks darker than usual. I checked the entire apartment anyway. Kitchen, living room, bathroom, guest room. Nothing. No signs that anyone had been there. I even checked closets because my brain had fully committed to paranoia at that point. Still nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe the phone line glitched somehow. Maybe one of my parents accidentally dialed while checking voicemail remotely. There had to be a normal explanation. I decided the best thing to do was distract myself until I got tired enough to sleep. My parents had the biggest TV and the most comfortable bed in the apartment, so I went into their bedroom and turned on the television. I figured background noise would help calm me down. For a while, it actually worked. I don't even remember what I was watching, some random late-night movie or maybe a comedy rerun. I wasn't really paying attention. I just needed sound in the apartment because the silence kept making me anxious. Hours passed. At some point, I started feeling sleepy. Then I noticed something that instantly woke me back up. A light was on in the computer room. I froze immediately. The computer room was across the hallway from my parents' bedroom, and from where I was sitting, I could clearly see light coming from inside it. My stomach dropped. I was almost certain I hadn't turned that light on earlier. The apartment suddenly felt freezing cold. All the fear from earlier came rushing back at once. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusions. Someone's here. Someone's been here the whole time. Or worse. I muted the TV slowly and stared at the hallway. The light stayed on. I remember sitting there trying to convince myself to move while every horror movie scene I'd ever watched replayed in my head. My entire body felt tense. Part of me wanted to stay in the bedroom until morning. Another part knew I couldn't just ignore it. So finally, after what felt like forever, I stood up and slowly walked toward the hallway. Every step felt loud. The apartment was completely silent except for the faint sound of the TV behind me. As I got closer to the computer room, I realized the light looked strange somehow. Softer. Less yellow than the normal ceiling light. Then it hit me. It wasn't the room light at all. It was sunlight. I stopped and looked toward the window. The sky outside was turning pale orange. It was dawn. The light coming into the room only looked bright because the rest of the apartment was still dark. I checked the clock. 6 a.m. I think I laughed out loud from pure relief. After spending the entire night scaring myself half to death, The mysterious light had turned out to be sunrise. The tension disappeared instantly. But at the same time, I realized just how exhausted I was. My brain had spent hours trapped in survival mode over absolutely nothing. I went back to my parents' bedroom, turned off the TV, and finally laid down to sleep. But even then, I remember having one last thought before drifting off. Deep down, I think my subconscious never fully relaxed that entire night. Even while watching TV, part of my brain stayed alert, almost warning me not to fall asleep completely, like it believed staying awake was somehow safer. Looking back now, I know most of it was probably anxiety mixed with imagination. Being alone for the first time, getting that weird phone call, walking into a silent apartment late at night, all of it combined into the perfect recipe for paranoia. But I still can't fully explain that phone call. To this day, whenever I think about it, I remember the way Lucas looked at me after checking the caller ID. "You said your whole family traveled, right?" At the time, it was probably nothing. But alone in an empty apartment at 1 a.m, it definitely didn't feel like nothing. Reading through stories like these always pulls strange memories out of the back of my mind. Most of them are things I completely forget about for years until something random suddenly brings them back. This is one of those memories. It happened when I was a kid, back in the house where I grew up. Even now, I can still picture the hallway perfectly, because the layout was weird enough to make it memorable. My bedroom sat at the very end of a long hallway on the second floor. The hallway had 4 different doors positioned in a strange way. Instead of the rooms being directly across from each other, they were slightly offset. So if you stood inside one doorway, you wouldn't be looking directly into the room opposite you. You'd see the room diagonally across instead. Across from my room was my older brother's bedroom. Next to that was another room, and diagonally from mine was the bathroom. For some reason, that bathroom always unsettled me a little as a kid. Nothing bad had ever happened there. It just had this old, outdated look that felt creepy at night. The wallpaper especially bothered me. It was dark brown with these strange swirling patterns and faded flowers spread all over it. During the daytime, it looked ugly but harmless. At night, though, the patterns looked different. The swirls almost blended together into shapes if you stared too long. The bathroom has been remodeled since then, but I still remember exactly what that wallpaper looked like. When I was younger, I hated sleeping in complete darkness. I wasn't terrified of the dark or anything dramatic like that, but I definitely wasn't comfortable with it either. I always slept with my bedroom door cracked open so a little light from the hallway lamp could reach my room. That hallway light stayed on almost every night. It made me feel safer. Not bright enough to fully light the room, just enough so the darkness didn't feel endless. One night, though, I woke up and noticed the hallway light was off. At first, I just stared at the ceiling, confused. The darkness immediately felt wrong. My room looked completely different without that soft glow coming from the hallway. I remember trying to ignore it for a few minutes, pulling my blanket higher and forcing myself to go back to sleep, but I couldn't relax. Every little sound in the house suddenly seemed louder. Eventually, I got annoyed enough to get out of bed and turn the light back on myself. I walked down the hallway, half asleep, and flipped the switch. The bulb instantly popped. The sound startled me so badly I jumped backward. 1 second there was darkness. The next there was a quick flash and a sharp snapping noise before everything went black again. Now the hallway somehow felt even creepier than before. I remember standing there staring upward at the dead bulb while trying not to panic over something so small. Looking back now, it sounds ridiculous, but when you're a kid, tiny things feel huge in the middle of the night. I knew there were replacement bulbs stored in one of the bathroom drawers, so I walked into the bathroom to grab one. The moment I stepped inside, I felt uncomfortable, not normal discomfort either. The kind where your body suddenly becomes hyper-aware for no obvious reason. I got this strong feeling that someone was watching me. Not from inside the bathroom itself, from the doorway. I can still remember that feeling clearly, even years later. It was so intense that I kept glancing over my shoulder while opening the drawer beneath the sink. The hallway behind me looked empty, but I couldn't shake the sensation that somebody was standing there just outside the room. Of course, nobody was actually there, at least not that I could see. I grabbed the new bulb as quickly as possible and replaced the old one. When the new light turned on, it looked brighter than the previous one. Much brighter, actually. The hallway suddenly had this pale yellow glow instead of the softer dim light I was used to. At the time, I didn't think much about it. I went back to my room, climbed into bed, and tried to fall asleep again. But something still felt off. My bedroom door remained slightly open, just like always, and from my bed I could see directly across the hallway into the bathroom doorway. The brighter bulb lit up part of the wallpaper inside the bathroom more clearly than usual. I remember lying there, staring absent-mindedly at the patterns on the wall. Then I noticed something strange. There was a face in the wallpaper. At first, I didn't react much because that's actually pretty common when you're tired. Humans naturally see faces in random patterns all the time. Clouds, curtains, tree bark. Your brain tries to create recognizable shapes out of chaos. So initially I brushed it off as imagination. The face wasn't perfectly clear anyway. It was more like certain swirls and dark flowers in the wallpaper happened to line up in a way that resembled facial features. Two dark spots looked like eyes. A curved line formed a mouth. Nothing supernatural. At least, that's what I told myself. Then, the face moved. Not physically off the wall. The pattern itself seemed to shift. The eyes looked different first. Then, the shape of the mouth changed slightly. It was subtle at the beginning, almost like my brain was rearranging the image while trying to understand it. But then, it kept changing. Slowly, the face became more detailed, more human. I remember freezing completely under my blanket while staring across the hallway. I didn't even want to blink, because every time the image shifted, it looked clearer. The longer I stared, the more distorted it became. The face stretched unnaturally. The nose lengthened. The mouth curved into this twisted expression that didn't even look human anymore. Eventually, it started resembling one of those stereotypical witches you see in old cartoons or Halloween decorations. A long, crooked nose, sharp features, a strange pointed hat shape forming above the head, but the entire thing looked warped somehow, like the face was melting or shifting constantly while still remaining recognizable. That was the part that terrified me most. If it had stayed one image, maybe I could have convinced myself it was just a trick of the wallpaper patterns. But the way it kept changing made it feel alive. I remember pulling the blanket up to my chin while trying desperately not to look directly at it anymore. But every few seconds, I glanced back toward the bathroom to check if it was still there. And every time I looked, the face seemed slightly different. The room felt freezing cold, even though it was probably normal temperature. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to wake my parents up so badly. But at the same time, I was embarrassed. What was I supposed to say? There's a witch in the wallpaper? Even as a kid, I knew how ridiculous that sounded. So instead, I stayed there silently, staring into the darkness for what felt like hours. Every shadow in the hallway suddenly looked threatening. The bright hallway light that was supposed to comfort me now made everything feel eerie instead. The wallpaper patterns seemed deeper and darker under that new bulb. I don't think I slept at all that night. If I did, it wasn't for long. Eventually morning came, and with daylight, the fear disappeared almost instantly. The bathroom looked completely normal again. The wallpaper was just wallpaper. No faces, no witches, no moving patterns, nothing. Still, I avoided looking directly at that wall for a while afterward. What makes the memory even stranger is the timing. Around that same period, my parents had started renovating the bathroom. We had recently replaced the toilet, and the floor tiles were being redone too. The bathroom constantly smelled faintly like paint, dust, and construction materials. Then, maybe 2 weeks to a month later, my parents finally got rid of that old wallpaper entirely. I remember feeling weirdly relieved when it disappeared. The bathroom instantly felt brighter and less oppressive afterward. New paint replaced the dark floral patterns, and the room suddenly looked modern instead of creepy. And after that, nothing strange ever happened again. No weird feelings, no faces. No staring at the bathroom from bed, feeling terrified. Looking back now, I can obviously explain most of it logically. I was a tired kid in the middle of the night, staring at complicated wallpaper patterns under unusual lighting. My imagination probably did the rest. The human brain is incredibly good at creating faces out of random shapes, especially when fear gets involved. But even knowing all that, the memory still unsettles me. Because in that moment, lying in bed and staring across the hallway, it didn't feel imaginary at all. It felt real. I can still picture the way the face slowly changed shape while I watched it. The distorted features, the crooked smile, the strange pointed hat forming out of shadows and swirls. And honestly, even now as an adult, if I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a face slowly forming in wallpaper across a dark hallway, I probably wouldn't sleep much either. This happened when my friend and I were around 15 or 16 years old, back when even simple situations somehow turned into unforgettable memories. Looking back now, it probably sounds less terrifying than it felt at the time. But I still remember the exact feeling of panic that hit us that night. We had just gotten out of a late movie showing at the local theater. I don't even remember what movie we watched anymore, but I remember the atmosphere afterward perfectly. It was one of those nights where the world feels strangely empty after the movie's end. The parking lot had mostly cleared out, the nearby stores were closed, and the streets looked darker than usual because there weren't many cars around. At first, everything felt normal. We were laughing about the movie while walking down the sidewalk, making dumb jokes and replaying our favorite scenes. Neither of us had a car yet, and the bus route didn't go anywhere close to where we needed to be, so walking was our only option. It honestly didn't seem like a big deal. We'd walked around late before plenty of times. The route home took us past a public park surrounded by one of those tall chain-link fences. During the daytime, the park was always busy with kids playing basketball, parents walking dogs, or people jogging around the track. But at night, it became completely different. Empty parks at night always feel unsettling. Even when nothing's wrong, they just have this strange atmosphere. The swings move slightly in the wind, the basketball courts sit abandoned under dim lights, and every sound seems louder than it should. As we walked alongside the fence, our conversation slowly started fading. Partly because we were getting tired, but also because the area around the park was unusually quiet. No traffic, no voices, nothing. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional rattling of the chain-link fence whenever the wind picked up. Then suddenly, my friend stopped walking. I remember taking another step before realizing he wasn't beside me anymore. "What?" I asked, turning around. He didn't answer right away. He was just staring through the fence into the park. I followed his eyes. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. There was a figure standing maybe 30 or 40 feet inside the park near one of the dim lights. Small, thin, a kid. At least, it looked like a kid. The weird thing was how still he stood, completely motionless, just staring directly at us. Even from that distance, something immediately felt wrong. Most kids would either wave, run around, or react somehow if they saw teenagers staring at them late at night. But this kid didn't move at all, didn't speak, didn't blink as far as I could tell. He just stood there silently watching us through the fence. Then we realized he wasn't wearing any clothes at all. I remember feeling this immediate wave of confusion mixed with fear. Your brain automatically tries to come up with explanations for things that don't make sense. Maybe he lost a dare. Maybe he was sleepwalking. Maybe we were seeing things wrong in the dark. But none of those explanations felt right. The entire situation felt deeply unsettling in a way I still can't fully explain. The park lights barely illuminated him, but there was enough light for us to clearly tell he was completely naked. And somehow, that made the whole thing infinitely creepier. Because what kid would be standing alone in a dark park at night like that? And why wasn't he saying anything? I remember my friend nervously laughing for half a second before the fear really hit both of us at once. Without even discussing it, we suddenly turned and started running. Not casual jogging either, full sprint. The kind where adrenaline completely takes over and you don't even think about how ridiculous you probably look. I could hear our shoes slamming against the sidewalk while we ran past dark houses and parked cars. Neither of us looked back immediately because we were too busy trying to get away from whatever we had just seen. After maybe 100 feet or so, we finally slowed down enough to catch our breath. We bent over with our hands on our knees, breathing hard and trying to laugh it off. "What the hell was that?" my friend asked between breaths. "I don't know," I said immediately. That was weird. For a few seconds, we just stood there trying to convince ourselves we had overreacted. Maybe it was some prank, maybe some teenager trying to freak people out. But even as we talked, I noticed my friend's expression suddenly change. The color drained from his face. He looked past me toward the park again. I turned around slowly, and there he was, the kid, standing behind the fence again, still staring at us, still silent. I swear my stomach dropped instantly. To this day, I don't know how he got there so fast. We had run a pretty decent distance, and there was no way we should have already seen him again unless he had been moving too. But we never heard footsteps, never heard the fence shake. Nothing. One second the area behind us was empty, and the next he was there again, just watching us through the chain-link fence. Completely motionless. That was the moment when the situation went from weird to genuinely terrifying. If he had chased us yelling or laughing, it would have felt more normal somehow. Human. But the silence made it horrifying. He didn't call out, didn't react, didn't even seem out of breath. He just stared. I remember the park light hitting part of his face while the rest stayed hidden in shadow. The fence cast strange lines across him, making him look almost unreal. Neither of us said another word. We just ran. This time we didn't stop at all. We sprinted the entire way back to my friend's house like our lives depended on it. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see him behind us or standing at another section of fence, somehow keeping pace. Thankfully, We never saw him again after that second time. When we finally reached my friend's house, we slammed the door behind us and immediately started trying to explain what happened to his older brother. But even while talking about it, we sounded unsure of ourselves because the whole thing felt so bizarre. His brother mostly laughed at us and assumed we got scared by some random drunk person or prankster. Maybe he was right. Honestly, there's probably a logical explanation for everything. But what stuck with me wasn't just seeing the kid. It was the way he looked at us. No expression, no embarrassment, no emotion at all. Just silent staring. That's the part I still remember years later. Sometimes your brain can sense when a situation feels wrong before you fully understand why. Standing outside that dark park, looking through the fence at this motionless figure under the dim lights, every instinct in my body screamed that we needed to leave immediately. And when we saw him again farther down the fence after running away, that feeling became pure panic. Even now, whenever I walk past empty parks late at night, I think about that moment. The quiet, the fence rattling softly in the wind, and that kid standing perfectly still in the darkness, watching us without saying a single word. Looking back now, I still don't know whether what happened in that house had a logical explanation, or if our minds slowly convinced us something was wrong there. But I can say this with complete honesty. I have never felt fear the way I felt it in that house. It started small. That's probably why nobody took it seriously at first. My family moved into the house when I was younger, and for a while, everything felt completely normal. It wasn't some ancient creepy mansion or abandoned-looking place either. It was just a regular family home and a normal neighborhood. During the day, nothing about it seemed strange. But after a few months, little things started happening. At first, they were so minor that nobody even reacted much. A door would slowly creak open by itself. Something left near the edge of a table would suddenly fall to the floor for no obvious reason. Sometimes cabinets in the kitchen would be slightly open, even though everyone swore they had closed them earlier. The weirdest part was that these things happened often enough for all of us to notice, but never dramatically enough to truly scare anyone. Not at first, anyway. Eventually, it became one of those running jokes families create to make strange situations feel less uncomfortable. We joked that the house had a ghost, and for some reason, we named him Larry. I honestly have no idea where the name came from. One of my siblings probably said it randomly one day, and it stuck. After that, every strange thing automatically became Larry's fault. Oh, Larry knocked the remote off the couch again. Larry opened the bathroom door. Larry's messing with the lights. We laughed about it constantly. And maybe that was our way of making ourselves feel less uneasy. Because deep down, I think all of us quietly felt that something about the house wasn't right. At night, the atmosphere inside the house changed completely. It's hard to explain unless you've experienced it yourself. During the daytime, the rooms felt normal, but once it got dark, everything seemed heavier somehow. The silence felt unnatural. Every sound stood out. Floorboards creaked louder. Pipes rattled in the walls. Sometimes you'd hear noises that sounded almost deliberate, like someone moving around in another room. Still, we kept dismissing it. Until the night I slept on the couch. My parents were away visiting family, and I remember wanting to stay up late watching TV in the living room. My siblings had already gone to bed upstairs, and eventually I got tired enough that I decided to just sleep downstairs instead of walking back to my room. At first, everything felt fine. The TV was playing quietly in the background while I scrolled through my phone and slowly drifted towards sleep. The living room lights were off except for the glow from the television, which flickered across the walls and furniture. Eventually, I turned the TV off too. The room instantly became pitch black. I remember adjusting my blanket and closing my eyes, expecting to fall asleep quickly. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, I heard it. Breathing. At first, I thought I imagined it. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Slow breathing, right beside me. My eyes immediately opened, but I couldn't see anything because the room was so dark. For a second, I stayed completely still, trying to listen carefully. Silence. I almost convinced myself it was just the house settling, or maybe air moving through the vents. Then I heard it again. Closer this time. I froze instantly. The breathing sounded like it was directly beside my head, not across the room, not somewhere distant, right next to my ear. I remember every muscle in my body locking up. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my chest. The breathing got louder. Slow inhale. Slow exhale. I was absolutely terrified. I wanted to move so badly. I wanted to jump up, turn on the lights, scream for someone, anything. But fear completely paralyzed me. I kept my eyes shut because some part of me was convinced that if I opened them, I'd see someone standing inches away from my face. Even now, years later, I can still remember exactly how real it sounded. At one point, I swear I felt something brush against my ear, very lightly, like fingers or hair moving across my skin. That was the moment pure panic hit me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I still couldn't move. I just laid there completely frozen while listening to that breathing beside my head. The worst part was not knowing how long it lasted. In my memory, it feels like forever. Realistically, it was probably less than 2 minutes, but fear stretches time in horrible ways. Finally, adrenaline took over. I suddenly jumped off the couch and practically dove toward the lamp behind me. I hit the switch so hard I almost knocked it over. The room flooded with light instantly. Nothing was there. Absolutely nothing. No person. No shadow. Nothing near the couch at all. I stood there breathing heavily while staring around the living room like an idiot, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The house was completely silent again. I barely slept the rest of that night. And honestly, that should have been the end of it. I should have convinced myself it was sleep paralysis or exhaustion or my imagination running wild in the dark. But the strange things kept happening after that. Actually, they got worse. Sometimes objects would move when nobody touched them. We'd hear footsteps upstairs while everyone was downstairs together. Doors would open slowly on their own, even when there weren't windows open. And then came the moment that truly shook me. I was home alone one afternoon. Completely alone. I know that for a fact because my parents were at work, and my siblings were out with friends. I was in the kitchen getting something to drink when I heard someone say my name. Clear as day. Not loud, just a normal voice speaking from somewhere nearby. I turned around instantly expecting one of my siblings to be standing there. Nobody was there. I checked every room in the house afterward, because the voice sounded so real that I genuinely believed someone had come home without me noticing. But the house was empty. That was the first time I seriously started feeling afraid of being alone there. Later, my siblings admitted they had experienced things too. One of them said they'd wake up at night, feeling like someone was standing in the corner of the room watching them. Another said they occasionally saw dark shapes near doorways late at night. We all tried not to talk about it too seriously because saying things out loud somehow made them feel more real. Still, the tension in the house kept growing. Nobody liked being alone anymore. And even though we still joked about Larry, the jokes didn't feel funny anymore. Then came the fire. About a year after the night on the couch, my entire family went on vacation together. I remember feeling oddly relieved to get away from the house for a while. We spent a few days relaxing, sightseeing, and trying to enjoy ourselves. Then we got the call. Our house had burned down. I still remember the silence in the car after my parents answered the phone. Nobody understood what was happening at first. It didn't feel real. By the time we got back home, most of the house was destroyed. The smell hit first. Smoke, burned wood, wet ash. Standing there looking at what used to be our home felt surreal. Rooms I'd grown up in were blackened and collapsed. Parts of the roof were gone entirely. And the strangest part? The fire investigators never fully figured out what caused it. Even years later, one of the investigators apparently described it as a weird case. They couldn't confidently determine what started the fire. Now, obviously, I know fires can happen for completely ordinary reasons. Electrical problems, faulty wiring, accidents. There are countless explanations. But after everything that happened in that house beforehand, it became impossible not to connect the events in our minds. Even now, my family occasionally talks about that house, usually during holidays or late-night conversations when old memories come up. And every single time, somebody eventually mentions Larry, half joking, half serious. I still don't know what I believe. Maybe fear and imagination slowly fed off each other until every small sound felt supernatural. Maybe once one person got scared, everyone else unconsciously started noticing ordinary things more intensely. Or maybe there really was something deeply wrong with that house. All I know is this: I have never again experienced the feeling of lying in complete darkness while hearing breathing inches away from my ear. And I hope I never do. For weeks, I kept having the same nightmare over and over again. It always started the same way, and every time I woke up, I felt this heavy fear sitting in my chest that wouldn't go away for hours. At first, I tried to ignore it, because everyone has weird dreams sometimes, right? But this one felt different. It wasn't just a random nightmare that faded away after breakfast. It stayed with me. Even during the day, I would think about it without meaning to. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at dark corners in my room longer than normal, almost expecting something to be there. I still don't know if the nightmare had anything to do with what happened that night, but the timing of it all has always bothered me. This happened around 3 years ago when I was still sharing a room with my younger sister. Our room wasn't very big. My bed was against one wall, and hers was closer to the window. We had one small lamp near the dresser that barely lit the room at night, so most of the time everything looked darker than it actually was. During the day, the room felt completely normal. But at night, especially after everyone was asleep, it always felt strangely quiet in a way that made every little sound stand out. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m., needing to use the bathroom. I remember checking the time on my phone because I couldn't fall asleep again right away. The house was silent. No TV downstairs, no footsteps, nothing. Just that deep kind of silence that only happens in the middle of the night. I got out of bed carefully so I wouldn't wake my sister. As I walked to the door, I left it almost completely closed behind me, just slightly open the way I always did. The hallway outside my room was dark except for a faint light coming from the bathroom down the hall. I remember feeling uncomfortable for no reason while walking there, like I was being watched, but I told myself I was just tired. After using the bathroom, I stood there for a second, trying to shake off the weird feeling. I even looked down the hallway toward my room before walking back. Everything looked normal. Quiet, still. But the second I pushed my bedroom door open, My entire body froze. Someone was sitting on my sister's bed. At first, my brain couldn't even process what I was seeing. The figure was sitting perfectly still with their legs crossed, facing directly toward the door like they had been waiting for me to come back. I couldn't make out a face. It was too dark for that. All I could really see was the outline of a person shaped like a shadow darker than the rest of the room. But I know for a fact that someone, or something, was there. The strangest part was how still it was, completely motionless. No shifting, no breathing, nothing. Just sitting there, staring at me. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My hand was still on the doorknob, and I remember feeling this wave of cold run through my entire body. It felt like every instinct in me was screaming to run, but I couldn't move. I tried telling myself it was my sister, but deep down I knew it wasn't. She was smaller, and besides, I could hear her breathing softly from the other side of the room. She was asleep in her own bed. That's when panic really hit me. I remember blinking hard because I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me from being half asleep. But the figure didn't disappear. It stayed there, sitting in the exact same position. Looking back now, what scares me the most isn't even what I saw. It's how unnatural the entire moment felt. The room suddenly felt colder, heavy, almost like the air itself had changed. It's hard to explain unless you've experienced something similar. It felt wrong in a way that went beyond fear. And then, something even stranger happened. I don't clearly remember what I did next. That part of the memory feels blurred out, almost like someone erased pieces of it. I remember standing there terrified. And then the next thing I really remember is being back in my bed under the covers, staring at the ceiling with my heart pounding. I didn't scream. I didn't wake my parents. I didn't even wake my sister. At the time, I think I was too scared to react. It was almost like my brain refused to fully process what had happened. I just buried myself under the blanket and tried not to look anywhere except the ceiling until morning came. I barely slept after that. Every tiny sound in the room made me jump. The creak of the walls, the sound of the air vent turning on, even my sister moving in her sleep scared me. I kept thinking if I looked over at her bed again, I'd still see that figure sitting there waiting. Morning finally came, and sunlight filled the room like nothing had happened. Everything looked normal again. Too normal. I remember staring at my sister's bed while getting ready for school, trying to convince myself it had just been my imagination. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe the shadows in the room created an illusion. Maybe the nightmares had messed with my head. But no explanation ever felt right. What really stayed with me was the feeling I had when I saw it, that pure certainty that someone was there. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone. Not because I thought people wouldn't believe me, but because saying it out loud somehow made it feel more real. I tried forcing myself to forget it happened. But after that night, things felt different. I became terrified of waking up during the night. If I needed water or had to use the bathroom, I would just lie there, trying to ignore it because I didn't want to leave my bed again. Even walking past dark rooms started making me nervous. I began sleeping with a small light on, something I hadn't done since I was little. And the nightmares got worse. They weren't exactly the same every time, but they all carried the same feeling. In the dreams, I would wake up and see someone sitting somewhere in the room watching me. Sometimes it was the corner near the closet. Sometimes it was at the foot of my bed. But every dream had that same horrible feeling of being watched by something silent. The weirdest thing is that the figure in my dreams always felt familiar. like it was connected to whatever I saw that night. Years have passed since then, and I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. Even now, whenever I wake up in the middle of the night, there's always this small moment before I open my eyes where I'm scared of what I might see. I know it sounds irrational, especially now that I'm older, but fear like that doesn't disappear easily. I've read a lot about sleep paralysis and hallucinations since then, trying to find some logical explanation. People say the brain can create terrifying images when you're tired or half asleep. And honestly, maybe that's what happened. Maybe my mind mixed the nightmares with the darkness in my room and created something that felt real. But there's one detail that still bothers me. I wasn't waking up from sleep when I saw it. I had already gotten out of bed, walked to the bathroom, turned lights on, washed my hands, and walked back fully awake. That's the part that makes me question everything. I wasn't dreaming anymore. At least I don't think I was. To this day, I can still picture the outline of that figure sitting on my sister's bed with its legs crossed, completely still, staring straight at me from the darkness. And honestly, I think what scares me the most is not knowing whether there was really something there, or whether my own mind was capable of creating something so real that it stayed with me for years afterward. A few years ago, I went through something that completely changed the way I looked at sleep, fear, and even my own mind. At the time, I had no explanation for what was happening to me, and honestly, that made the experience so much worse. I truly believed something evil was in my room. It sounds dramatic now, but when you experience something like that firsthand, logic disappears very quickly. Back then, I had never heard of sleep paralysis. I didn't know it was a real condition, and I definitely didn't know how common it actually was. To me, what happened felt supernatural. It felt impossible to explain. Only recently did I finally come across the term and realize that countless other people around the world have gone through almost identical experiences. Even now, knowing the science behind it doesn't make it any less terrifying. The first time it happened, I remember waking up suddenly in the middle of the night. My room was dark except for a faint glow coming through the curtains from the streetlights outside. At first, everything seemed normal. I was lying on my back, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out why I woke up. But then I realized something was horribly wrong. I couldn't move. At all. Not my arms, not my legs, not even my head. It felt like my entire body had been glued to the mattress. I tried forcing myself to sit up, but nothing responded. The harder I tried to move, the more panic started building inside me. At first, I thought maybe I was still dreaming. But I could see my room clearly. I could hear the sound of the fan spinning. I could hear cars faintly passing outside. Everything around me felt completely real. My mind was fully awake, but my body refused to respond. That's when the fear really started. I suddenly became aware of this horrible feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. It's difficult to describe unless you've experienced it yourself. It wasn't just fear. It was this overwhelming sense of dread, like every instinct in my body was warning me that something dangerous was nearby. And then I saw it. Near the corner of my room, standing in the darkness, was a figure. At first it looked almost human, but not fully. More like a shadow shaped like a person. I couldn't make out a face or details, but I knew it was looking directly at me. I remember feeling my heartbeat pounding so hard that I thought I might actually pass out. The figure didn't move quickly or dramatically like something from a horror movie. That almost would have been easier to process. Instead, it just stood there, silently watching me. And somehow, that made it worse. I tried screaming for help, but nothing came out except weak breaths. My chest suddenly felt incredibly heavy, like someone was pressing down on me with all their weight. Breathing became difficult. Every second felt stretched out forever. I genuinely thought I was dying. The strange thing about sleep paralysis is how real it feels. Even now, years later, I can still remember every detail of that room in that moment. The shadows on the wall, the sound of my breathing, the exact position of the figure standing there. It didn't feel like a dream at all. It felt more real than some actual memories from my life. Eventually, after what felt like several minutes, I managed to move one finger. Then my arm suddenly jerked, and all at once the paralysis disappeared. I sat up gasping for air and immediately turned on every light in the room. Of course, nothing was there. I barely slept for the rest of the night. I kept replaying the experience in my head, trying to understand what had happened. Part of me knew it couldn't have been real, but another part of me was completely convinced that I had seen something supernatural. For weeks afterward, I became afraid of going to sleep. Every night, I worried it would happen again. Sometimes I would force myself to stay awake until I physically couldn't anymore, because I was terrified of waking up frozen again. I started sleeping with lights on and keeping the TV running quietly in the background, just so the room wouldn't feel so empty. Eventually, life returned to normal, and I convinced myself it had been some strange one-time experience. Then, it happened again. The second episode was even worse because this time, the moment I woke up unable to move, I instantly recognized what was happening. That awareness didn't comfort me at all. If anything, it made the panic come faster. Again, my body was completely paralyzed while my mind stayed awake. I could see my room clearly, but it felt wrong somehow, almost distorted by fear itself. And again, there was this unbearable feeling that something was in the room with me. This time, I didn't even want to look around. I remember staring straight at the ceiling because I was terrified of what I might see if I turned my eyes toward the corner of the room. But even without looking, I could feel that presence. It felt close, watching, waiting. Then came the pressure on my chest again. People who have never experienced sleep paralysis often underestimate how terrifying that sensation is. It doesn't just feel like heaviness. It feels like something physically pinning you down while you struggle to breathe. Your brain is awake enough to understand what's happening, but your body remains trapped in this frozen state. Panic takes over very quickly. I tried calming myself down, but fear completely overwhelmed me. My thoughts became irrational almost instantly. I remember thinking, this is it. Something is in here with me. And honestly, that's the part that stays with you long after the episode ends. Even once you logically understand that it was caused by the brain being stuck between sleep and wakefulness, the emotional impact remains very real. Eventually, just like the first time, the paralysis suddenly broke. My body jolted awake, and I sat upright, breathing hard, covered in sweat. I didn't go back to sleep that night either. For a long time, I avoided talking about those experiences, because I genuinely thought people would think I was crazy. How do you explain something that felt completely real, but technically never happened? How do you describe the fear of seeing figures standing in your room while being unable to move or scream? Years later, while randomly scrolling online, I came across a discussion about sleep paralysis. The descriptions were so specific that it honestly shocked me. People talked about shadow figures, pressure on the chest, feelings of evil presence, paralysis, and intense terror, almost exactly the way I experienced it. That was the first time I realized I wasn't alone. Apparently, sleep paralysis happens when the brain wakes up before the body fully exits REM sleep. During REM sleep, the body naturally becomes temporarily paralyzed to stop us from physically acting out dreams. Sometimes the mind wakes up before that paralysis fades, creating this horrifying state where you're conscious but unable to move. And because the brain is still partially in a dream state, hallucinations can happen. Knowing that explanation helped me understand the experience logically, but emotionally, it still feels unsettling. The human brain is powerful enough to create hallucinations that feel absolutely real. In those moments, fear becomes almost impossible to control, because your senses are fully convinced the danger exists. Even now, if I wake up suddenly during the night, there's sometimes a split second where panic hits me before I realize I can still move normally. That fear never fully disappears once you've experienced sleep paralysis. What makes it especially traumatic for many people is not understanding what's happening while it occurs. Without context, it genuinely feels supernatural. Throughout history, different cultures created myths and stories to explain these episodes because the experience is so vivid and disturbing. Some believed demons were attacking them during sleep. Others believed spirits were sitting on their chest or haunting their rooms. And honestly, after going through it myself, I completely understand why people believe those things. When your body is frozen, your chest feels crushed, and your mind is convinced something evil is standing inches away from you, rational thinking disappears. Survival instinct takes over completely. I haven't experienced another episode in a long time, and I hope I never do again. But even with all the scientific explanations and understanding I have now, I know that if it ever happens again, it will still be one of the most terrifying experiences imaginable, because no amount of knowledge truly prepares you for waking up in the middle of the night, unable to move, while your mind convinces you that something in the darkness is staring directly at you. About 4 years ago, something happened in my area that completely changed the way people looked at quiet streets at night. Before that, our neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it still felt relatively safe. People walked their dogs early in the morning, couples jogged before sunrise, kids rode bikes during the day, and most of us never really thought twice about hearing a car slowly drive past the house late at night. Then the murder happened. It spread through the neighborhood almost immediately. Not through the news at first, but through whispers. Parents talking outside while checking the mail. Neighbors standing in driveways speaking quietly. Everyone repeating slightly different versions of the same story. An older man and his wife had been out jogging around 5 in the morning. They followed the same route almost every day, so people in the area recognized them. According to what everyone heard, a white van pulled up beside them on one of the quieter roads near the edge of the neighborhood. The van had no markings, no company logo, no license plate anyone could clearly remember. Just a plain white van. Several men got out. From what police later suspected, it was connected to a gang initiation. The husband was attacked right there in the street while his wife watched helplessly. By the time authorities arrived, the man was dead. The story shook everybody. After that, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed overnight. Suddenly, people became suspicious of unfamiliar vehicles. Parents stopped letting their kids stay out late. Morning joggers changed routes or stopped running alone altogether. Every white van people saw after that immediately caught attention. And honestly, once fear enters your mind like that, it stays there. A week after the murder, I had almost convinced myself the paranoia around the neighborhood was getting exaggerated. I was 19 at the time, and like most 19-year-olds, I thought I was invincible. Bad things happened to other people, not to me. That night, I was planning to sneak my girlfriend out of her house. Her parents were extremely strict, so we had this stupid little routine whenever we wanted to hang out late. I'd park my car around the corner instead of directly outside her house, then walk down a back road that connected to the side of her yard. She would quietly open her bedroom window, climb out, and we'd leave before anyone noticed. At the time, it felt exciting and rebellious. Looking back now, all I can think about is how vulnerable I actually was. It was around midnight when I parked the car. The neighborhood looked completely dead. No lights on in most houses, no people outside, just the occasional sound of distant traffic far away from the main road. The back street I walked down was darker than the rest of the neighborhood. There weren't many streetlights, and parts of the road were lined with trees that blocked what little light existed. During the daytime, it looked harmless, but at night, it felt isolated. I remember shoving my hands into my hoodie pocket as I walked, mostly because it was cold. My mind wasn't focused on danger at all. I was thinking about whether my girlfriend would get caught climbing out the window. Then I saw headlights appear behind me. At first I didn't pay attention. Cars drove through there occasionally. But after a few seconds, something about it started feeling wrong. The vehicle was moving unusually slow. I glanced over my shoulder casually, expecting to see a normal car. Instead, I saw a white van. The second I noticed it, every story from the previous week came rushing back into my mind instantly. The murder, the gang initiation rumors, the older man beaten to death in the street. My entire body reacted before my brain even fully processed it. I felt this sudden rush of adrenaline hit me so hard, it almost made me nauseous. My heartbeat immediately sped up. It's strange how powerful instinct can be sometimes. 1 second I was calm, and the next my body was screaming that something was wrong. Still, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. I remember actually laughing nervously under my breath. I told myself I was being paranoid because of the recent murder. White vans existed everywhere. It didn't mean anything. But then the van started slowing down even more. That's when the fear became real. I kept walking, trying not to make it obvious that I was panicking, but I could hear the vehicle creeping beside me now. Slowly. Quietly. Then, it pulled over next to the curb, right beside me, and the headlights turned off. I'll never forget that part. The sudden darkness felt wrong in a way I still can't fully explain. 1 second the road was lit by the van's headlights, and the next everything became dim again, except for a weak streetlight farther down the road. I turned my head slightly and saw there were no back windows on the van. None. Just smooth, white panels. The side door didn't open, but I swear I felt eyes on me from inside the vehicle. Watching. Waiting. Every survival instinct I had kicked in at once. People always imagine fear as this dramatic moment where you stop and think carefully about your next move. Real fear isn't like that. Real fear is instant. Animal-like. Your body decides before your mind does. And mine decided to run. The second I started sprinting, pure adrenaline completely took over my body. I have never run that fast before or since. It felt like every muscle in my body was operating beyond normal limits. I didn't look back immediately because I was terrified of what I might see. My shoes slammed against the pavement as I ran down the dark road toward my girlfriend's neighborhood. My chest hurt almost instantly, but I ignored it. In my head, there was only one thought repeating over and over. Don't stop. Then, I heard the engine rev. I finally looked back for a split second. The van accelerated suddenly, tires screeching slightly as it pulled back onto the road. For one horrifying moment, I thought it was coming after me. Instead, it sped off in the opposite direction and disappeared into the darkness. Just like that. Gone. I eventually made it to my girlfriend's yard completely out of breath. I remember bending over with my hands on my knees, trying not to throw up while adrenaline still flooded my system. She opened the window a few minutes later, smiling like normal. But the second she saw my face, her expression changed immediately. I must have looked terrified. I told her what happened, and even while explaining it, I kept trying to downplay the situation. Part of me still wanted to believe it was all coincidence. Maybe the driver was lost. Maybe they were pulling over to check directions or answer a phone call. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The timing felt too wrong. The slow approach, pulling over beside me, turning the headlights off, no windows, no markings. To this day, I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run. Maybe nothing. Maybe it really was innocent coincidence, and I let fear control me because of what had happened the week before. I've tried telling myself that many times over the years. But sometimes, late at night, when I think about it too long, I remember the exact feeling I had standing beside that van. And fear like that usually exists for a reason. What scares me most is how quickly a normal night could have become something else entirely. One small decision separated two completely different outcomes. If I had ignored my instincts and kept walking slowly, if I had stopped when the van pulled over, if I had tried looking inside instead of running, maybe I wouldn't be here talking about it now. That realization stayed with me for a long time afterward. For months, every time I saw a white van while driving at night, my chest tightened automatically. I started paying more attention to exits, people around me, parked vehicles, everything. That experience permanently changed the way I move through the world. People often talk about gut feelings like they're irrational, but sometimes your brain notices danger before you consciously understand it. Tiny details, behavior patterns, movement, tone. Something deep inside you recognizes that things aren't normal. And that night, every instinct in me was screaming to get away. I'm older now, and I've had plenty of time to think about the situation logically. Maybe I truly was overreacting. Maybe those people had no idea they terrified me. Maybe they simply pulled over for unrelated reasons and drove away because they realized I panicked. But there's another possibility too. Maybe that adrenaline rush saved my life. And honestly, I'll never know which explanation is worst.